Hello and welcome to the machine. What I want to talk about is this idea of quitting video games. This January, I decided that video games were no longer for me. I decided that I was going to go cold turkey. So, in the past, I spent a lot of time improving my video game skill, whether it was Age of Mythology, World of Warcraft, or Smite, or Civilization 6, I would spend a lot of time trying to refine my skills and trying to refine my strategy. If I'm being honest, I thought this was a pretty intellectually stimulating thing, and I appreciated having the stimulation because it felt more interesting than a lot of what I was doing outside of that. And I thought that giving this sort of thing up would mean that my life as a result would become less interesting. And I really think that my life has improved since I quit video games in terms of gratification. I used to think that, but I don't think that anymore because I think that my focus has become more in line. So I've often gotten described as a little bit loopy and distractible, but as I've gotten off social media and I've gotten off video games, I found that my focus increased, that I didn't have something to look at otherwise. And even when I was distracted, I was able to pay more attention and I would do something cognitively complex like reading as opposed to clicking a button when something new was happening. So I spent a lot of time playing these video games and I thought I was getting better, and I thought that would have some sort of good result associated with them. But I always found that when I took a lot of time off from the video games, I actually started to feel better about my performance when I got back on them. And I wasn't really sure what the case it was with that because the way it seems is when you stop playing video games for a while and you immediately start, it feels like meh for a couple days, and then it feels really good, and then it kind of recedes to average. I think that this is because video games are fundamentally addictive. Video games fundamentally trigger our dopamine sensors and make us think that there's lots of events happening all the time, as opposed to events that really happen over time. And sure, there's other types of video games that are a little bit more slow paced, like Dwarf Fortress, that have like a longer, more drawn out story. But these games are the exception, not the rule. And the level of cognitive complexity associated with that type of game is wasted when you compare it to the things you could be doing to make your life more interesting or better to begin with. What I mean with this is that sometimes we see video games as an alternative to improving one's life. If it's really easy to chop down a tree in Minecraft and hard to chop down a tree in real life, you're probably going to opt to chop down the tree in Minecraft. And I think that same thing where it feels rewarding to do something and you get the reward without putting in the work, you tend to have like a shorter period when it comes to determining what you want to do. So I think that having a longer period or moving back to a more base rate fundamentally delays your gratification in a way that is important for making decisions about long-term goals. What I mean by this is when people spend a lot of time playing video games, they tend not to be thinking as far in the future because their hardwiring or their circuitry pushes them to be more in the present. As I've gotten off social media and other things, I've noticed I've had some virtuous cycles take place where the idea of quitting sugar for a prolonged period of time would be unthinkable now, um, because of the fact that it would be easy to take the sugary object, consume it while playing video games. The time and the convenience for doing so is less, which means that I spend less time doing this, which means that I have been eating healthier. And so I'm starting to see sort of this holy cycle. I say holy despite the fact that I'm non-religious, to basically focus on this idea that as one aspect of my life improved through constant and deliberate focus, through getting rid of a distraction, through getting rid of an addiction, other addictions that were slightly harder to get over became easier to surmount as well. So it's really momentum that seems important when it comes to getting closer to what you need to do. And I wanted to take this time to talk about why I'm a little bit mixed about the Brian Tracy book that I had talked about previously, and why I think that eating the frog or doing the most difficult thing first may not be the right thing in the short term to get onto the long-term trajectory, which is that uh, the central idea of this book is that you do the first thing you need to do, and it's the hardest thing you need to do, and it's the most important thing you need to do. And since you do it first, you get it done, whereas otherwise you wouldn't be able to do that. And he makes the point that if you get into a habit of doing this, things become a lot easier. Um, but the fundamental challenge is getting into the habit of doing this. Because if you don't get into the habit of dealing with complicated stuff, of improving yourself, it's going to be pretty hard to regularly find the willpower to do this thing. And so, unless you have this sort of identity as somebody who gets things done, you may not be able to get all the way there. And that's why I think it's important to think about this in terms of momentum. Or I find when I start cleaning one small thing that seems a little bit insignificant, it makes it easier to do other things. I like the idea of starting early, and I like the idea of doing the big thing in um, in an approach that lets it get done pretty early in the day. But I'm not convinced that doing it first is something that is valuable for a lot of people, especially a lot of people who struggle with motivation. I find something that I do instead tends to be a little bit better. So when I go out clubbing, and I don't drink anymore at this point, but I still like to go out and dance and explore and talk to people. But when I go out clubbing, I like to put on a bandana. I find this bandana I associate with clubbing, and I get into the mood where clubbing becomes extra rewarding as a result of the fact that I have the bandana on. So there's sort of a feedback loop that I've created related to that, and I find that it's kind of interesting. It's sort of why when people go to fancy places, they tend to wear suits, because the association of the suit is helpful for achieving your goals. It's helpful for getting what you need done. And I think that's important. I think it's extremely important to figure out how to put the least amount of cognitive brain power, the least amount of willpower into doing what you need to do. I think I'm a very distractible person in general, and I think that requiring my mind to focus on something for a very long period of time isn't going to help me achieve my goals. So, looking for ways that I eliminate distractions from my life can make things a lot easier and can also make it so the addictions that exist in my life are less prevalent. For instance, I kind of suck at avoiding sugar. When I'm home and there's a Linzer tart in the freezer, that Linzer tart or that rainbow cookie that looks delicious, or those peanut butter cups or those jelly beans, another one of my favorites, tend not to last very long. And they tend not to last very long because I pig out. I start with one, and suddenly I'm 15 down, and there's none left. And that's wonderful. I like what I'm consuming, and I enjoy it, but it's not good for me. And I could try using willpower to overcome it, or I could not keep those things in the house. And maybe that doesn't put me in a situation where I'm always going to be doing no dessert for the right reasons. But when I left my computer at home and I just didn't have it, it made it very easy to make the choices that would lead me to having a better life. When I deleted my Instagram, I no longer have the 1,600 plus followers that I previously had, and now I can't really return to it whether I like to or not. I built in this lock-in mechanism, and I want to sort of shift to talking about what a lock-in mechanism is and talk a little bit about economics. So a lock-in mechanism is essentially this idea that sometimes it becomes expensive to change the course of action that you're on when you have a common standard. When you think of something like the USB-C or USB, you tend to notice that these things are probably not optimized for each and every individual device. In fact, sometimes some of the technology is wasteful and not particularly helpful. So why is it that you struggle to see things challenge the underlying paradigm? Why do paradigms stick around despite the fact there may be more efficient paradigms? Transition costs. It's really expensive to move out of something when you move into a paradigm that has like an element of lock-in. And so when it comes to dealing with your own personal life, if you can find a way to lock in eating healthier, like not having sugar in the house, or not having a lot of fried food in the house, or having protein everywhere, it becomes really easy to do those things. And so I think when it comes to having mess, when it comes to focus, the less things that are in your way, the easier it is to achieve your goals. Thus, think about the things that are in your way. Think about the things that are cluttering your life. Think about the things that are difficult to overcome and try getting rid of them. And I know some people might say that it's easy to practice moderation. If I just do like a little bit of sugar at night, or half an hour of video games, or half an hour of social media a day, things will be good. But it's never a half hour. And it's never a half hour because you built in the lock-in effect where it's considered legitimate to do something. I got off social media for a long time after my freshman year of college, and I found that it was pretty easy. I wasn't distracted very much, and I was able to focus on things that would allow me to improve my life. Um, when I got back on it a little bit, it tended to beget itself, and it tended to sneak its way back into my life. I aim to make decisions that don't put me in a situation where the easier path is to do just a little bit more. I want to put myself in a situation where if I've got to do any, I've got to put a fair amount of work in. And I'm sure when you're thinking about economics, that there's a saturation point, which is a little bit better than zero. And that like the marginal cost is not really that high. But if you know that you're going to be doing something a certain way when you do it, and that is the inevitable consequence, you tend to see suboptimal results. This kind of links in with this idea of public choice, where it often becomes a debate about what actually happens as opposed to what ideally happens. So, if you're thinking about this in terms of comparison, there's this example that was given in the G.A. Cohen argument for Marxism as this idea of idealism. And the idea basically went that if life is a camping trip, it's better that people are not assholes. If everyone just sort of shares things and like, people are able to let each other use each other's tents without a big deal, and people, let each other borrow each other's fishing rods, and they don't like weigh the specific tents. Everyone is sort of on the same page, on the same team. Things are good, and that sucks compared to a situation where people are charging each other for using each other's fishing rods, and there's kind of constant status rivalry, and the people who have the most fishing rods sell things at a significantly higher price. Um, and the idea that that's kind of wrong with this fishing trip analogy is comparing optimal, sort of idealized to unideal reality on one side. When you assume that your motivations fundamentally change into the surreal in some circumstances versus other circumstances, you are going to be more likely to go for the thing that you want already. So it's important to recognize when you are truly making a difference in terms of realistic expectations. So bringing that weird roundabout back to the more specific topic at hand, when you think about how you use video games, be honest with yourself. Are you playing video games for half an hour a day? I certainly wasn't. I spent a lot longer on those. Was I spending only half an hour on social media a day? No. Was I eating only a little bit of sugar? Did it keep under control? No. And so by building in this lock-in path, I think that my realistic choice is going to be better than the realistic choice than if I still had those things. I think this middle ground that people talk about is a little bit ethereal. It's a little bit fictitious. It assumes that people are not who they are. It assumes that addiction does not exist. And that's a big reason that I've been moving away from things that I think in general are bad. And I thank you for listening to The Machine, and I hope you have a good night.